Yo, what is going on, guys? Izzy here, back again with a brand new video today. So this is now the 9th and final episode of my new series in which I review every single Sony Spider-Man Universe film up to the release of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Today we're going to be reviewing Morbius, which came out in 2022 and was directed by Daniel Espinosa. So right before I go into my review for Morbius, this is a very interesting movie to talk about because this is one of the more controversial Sony Spider-Man Universe movies. It currently, as I have on my computer right here, a 16% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, but it also has a 71% audience score. So to say that critics and audiences are mixed on this movie might be a little bit of an understatement, because when this movie came out, it seemed like a lot of the press around it was very negative. And as time's gone on, I don't think the movie's necessarily gained a whole lot of love, but it seems like people are saying either bad stuff about it, or they're kind of like, it's in this weird kind of like gray area of the movie, whether it's good or it's bad. And I think part of a huge reason for that is because of not knowing really what the movie was going to be, or mixed expectations, or false expectations rather, and people just not being sure what this is. So before I go into my actual thoughts for it, I think I want to elaborate on that just a little bit more. So this movie, the original trailer for it came out 2 years before the movie came out, but the movie kept getting delayed because of COVID-19, and eventually they decided to put the movie out on January 21st, 2022. That way it would have been a month after Spider-Man No Way Home. But then they decided for whatever reason to push it back all the way till April 1st, which seems kind of interesting. I don't know why they would push a movie like that all the way back. I'm assuming they probably wanted to rework some things. I don't really know. But they did that, and it was also 1 month before Multiverse of Madness. And given that Morbius is part of the Sony Spider-Man Universe, and No Way Home and Venom Let There Be Carnage had a open multiverse thing go on in those movies, and we were going into Multiverse of Madness, I think the expectations for Morbius was that it was going to be a tacked-on story that was part of a grander multiverse story within the MCU, and instead what we got was a superhero origin story. So I think when people decided to give this movie negative reviews, I think expectations is probably a huge reason why. I think that people expected it to be like, oh, it's going to be really cool, it's going to be part of this like Spider-Man thing, it's going to be part of this multiverse thing, it's going to be really, really cool, and then when it wasn't really all that much a part of it, people were like, it's whatever. And if you guys want to know my personal opinions on Morbius, I think this movie's alright. I think it's overhated. I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be. I don't even think it's necessarily a bad movie. I think it's a decent film. I can sit back and I can watch it. I think it's okay. But I never thought this movie was great, and it's got some issues to it that I'm definitely going to go to in my review. But if you expect me to just trash on this movie in this review, you clicked on the wrong video. So if you guys wanted to see me trash on it, I'm sorry to tell you that that's not going to happen. I will, however, tell you the things I like about Morbius and the things I don't like about Morbius. But my general consensus of the movie is that it's alright, I can watch it, it's watchable, it's okay, it's entertaining, but it definitely has some flaws, but it has some good stuff though. So without further ado, I'm going to go into my review for Morbius and let you guys know why I think about this movie the way that I do. So starting off with the good stuff, first off, I think that Jared Leto is actually pretty good as Dr. Michael Morbius, and I also think that Matt Smith is actually pretty good as Milo Morbius, or as we're introduced to him in the film as Lucian Crown. And I like these two characters because there's a really interesting brotherly dynamic between these two characters that make for a very interesting hero and villain arc. And so at the beginning of the movie, we're introduced to their backstories, and their backstories are actually pretty interesting. That's the thing about Morbius I always appreciate, is that the first act of this movie I got really invested in, and I was able to walk away from the movie saying, like, okay, like I didn't love the movie, but I was invested into it. And the backstory between these two characters and the brotherly dynamic between these two characters, I thought really worked for the movie. I was like, okay, this is a really interesting story. I like what they're doing with this. I think that the actual setup for the movie, pretty good. There's some issues I have going down later into the movie, but I think the actual first act and the setup, I'm like, okay, this is something that I find interesting. I can buy into this. This is like, that's a cool dynamic between these two characters. These two characters who grew up with each other, who have this like weird dynamic going on now that they have this weird thing going on. So I'm not going to go too deep into the plot because I don't really want to spoil this movie or anything, but their relationship ends up going sour because Michael Morbius, does something that Milo doesn't necessarily approve of, and so it really creates an interesting kind of conflict where they're both in their own opinions, they're both right, or they think they're right from their own perspective, but it's kind of like in more of a gray area, and I'm all for that in superhero movies. I like the fact that this isn't a black and white movie. It actually kind of makes you go, oh, okay, so I see where this character's coming from, I see where this character's coming from. That's really interesting. So I think that the actual story setup and the basic plot for the movie, good stuff. I think they actually did a pretty good job with that. I think Morbius is a pretty interesting origin story. The way in which he becomes the vampire that he becomes, I actually find kind of interesting. And it's, again, one of those, like, gray area stories where it's like, oh, it meant to go like this, but it ended up going like this, and it created this huge conflict. More stuff that I like. I think that they did a good job at trying to get you interested in what they were going to do with this character. I also think Jared Harris is actually pretty good as Emil Nicholas. I think he's pretty good because he's kind of like the mediator between these two characters, and he's like the guy they grew up with. So I appreciate his role in the movie. I kind of wish he was in it just a little bit more. And there's actually some moments in the trailer that didn't make it into the movie where it seemed like they were going to elaborate on his character more. So I kind of wish they left that in there. But I think for the scenes he's in, he does a pretty good job, and I appreciate his role in the movie. There's some really cool CGI and special effects in the movie, too. I know people really like to trash on the effects in this movie. I will admit there's some times in the movie where the effects don't work for me, but I feel like for the most part, there's some pretty cool effects. I think it's also a very cool-looking movie. I think that the effects, especially with, like, the vampire stuff, so whenever Morbius turned into the vampire version of himself, and like the effects of like the way his hand looks and the face stuff, I thought that stuff actually looked really cool. I was watching it on my big TV in my living room yesterday, and I was like, I like the way that looks. I think the way they made the visuals for that. I'd actually appreciate if they made more visuals like that within Marvel movies. I'm like, that's a really cool visuals. There's some cool visual stuff in this movie. I think there's also some really cool choreography and some of the action. This movie doesn't have the most memorable action sequences, but they're entertaining enough. I can sit down and I can enjoy them. But I think there's some really cool choreography, especially with some of the weird vampire movements of moving fast and all that. So this is not a great movie, or this is not a great action movie, but I think there are some cool action moments and some really cool choreography done in it. And this movie also has a cool look to it. Now, it doesn't necessarily have the most unique directing style of all time or anything, but it's got like a cool kind of gritty tone to it with a lot of like cool blues and like light aquamarine greens and grays, and some people might think it looks kind of dull, but I don't know, it has this interesting kind of gritty vibe to it that's also kind of beautiful, if you know what I mean. I was like, this is a kind of interesting, cool looking movie. I think that it's a decent looking movie that like, I think it's very visually, aesthetically pleasing. And there's also some genuine moments of shock and horror. There's not like an amazingly directed movie. There's some moments in the movie where I actually was scared to find out what they were going to do next with the character, because sometimes Morbius can actually be a little bit scary. Sometimes Milo could actually be a little bit scary. So there were some moments where I was like, wait, I'm not sure what they're going to do. So there's some actual moments of shock and horror that I thought were actually pretty well directed, and I actually like that they took some risks like that within a Marvel movie like this. There's also some fun jokes in the movie here and there. Now, this is not necessarily a jokey movie, but it has some fun jokes here and there that I appreciate they put that in there, so it's not just like drowned in its own darkness. So I appreciate the fact that this movie didn't take itself overly seriously, because I feel like if they did, the movie would have just been messier than it already was. And also, I think Tyrese Gibson and Al Madrigal are actually kind of fun as the two feds. They aren't given much to do, though. Like, they're actually, like, they're fun when they're there. I remember their presence in the movie. I watched the movie I didn't watch it for the first time last night, but I watched it for the first time since I saw it in theaters over a year ago, and I was like, yeah, I remember they're in this movie. I kind of just wish they gave them more to do. So, like, they're memorable enough, but they're not really given a whole lot to do. But they are still kind of fun. So I think that Morbius has some really good stuff going for it. It has some interesting storylines, some cool visual stuff, some cool action stuff, and it's got some fun stuff going for it. But the movie does have flaws, so let's talk about the flaws. Now, interestingly enough, some of you guys might be surprised that my flaws list is actually kind of short. And it's not necessarily... and the reason I have it so short is because I don't necessarily feel like there's, like, layers upon layers upon layers of flaws like I think there is within like the Amazing Spider-Man 2 or Spider-Man 3. I think there's like a few big flaws with this movie that kind of weigh it down, unfortunately. My big overall flaw with this movie, I want to just get this out the way real quick. I think the movie is too short, and I think that the third act especially needed to be longer. So this is a movie that when I first saw it, the first two acts, when I first saw it in theaters, I didn't really have any big issues with. I was like, okay, this isn't the best movie I've ever seen, but this is like a nice comic book B movie. It's like, it's not the best movie I've ever seen in my life, but it's like, this is fun. I can enjoy this. This is entertaining. I thought that the first two acts were like good enough. They kind of reminded me of how I felt about Venom, or Venom 3 Carnage, where it's like, not an amazing movie, but a fun movie. So the first two acts I thought were actually pretty good. I thought they flowed together decently well. So once we get to the third act, I kind of felt like the story got kind of messy, because it kind of feels like the movie was probably reworked a lot in the editing room. I have yet to confirm this, but I think that's probably what happened, considering the amount of delays that happened and the amount of things in the trailer that didn't show up in the movie. And so when I looked at the third act, it kind of felt like at that point we stopped going at this decent flow and we started kind of like rushing through plot points, to where I felt like whenever we get to the final battle at the end, it's a cool battle, like it's a very visually cool thing. I like how it looks, and I actually like the action with it, but it kind of felt like it didn't feel earned enough. I felt like there needed to be more time, maybe like 15 or 20 minutes longer. I think probably would have helped out the third act. It would have made it feel a lot more earned. I would have felt a lot more compelled with what they were doing with the characters. So that's where Morbius is kind of weird for me. It's like, I like the actual idea of the movie, I like some of the stuff they do with it, but the third act is a thing where it's like, it's cool, but it needed to be earned more. Had they given it more time and not rushed to the third act so much, I think I probably would have liked this movie a lot more. I probably would have given it a B. Like I said, there's like a comic book B movie. It's not a great movie, but it's a fun, good movie, you know what I mean? So I feel like had the third act been just a little bit longer, like 15, 20 minutes, had this movie clocked in at 2 hours instead of an hour and 45 minutes, I think I would have given this a B. I think it would have been a fun comic book B movie, kind of like Venom, and instead it became an okay comic book B movie. So I kind of feel like that's the main issue with the film, is that the third act needed to be longer. It really needed to be longer in order for it to feel as satisfying as it could have. My other kind of issue is that the supporting characters aren't the most memorable. Adria Arjona as Martine Bancroft has some nice moments, and I'm not trashing on her performance at all. She's fine. But again, it's like a supporting character who's not given a lot to do, kind of like Jenny Slate in Venom, where it's like, I forgot they were there whenever I rewatched it, because it's like, they're alright when they're there, but it's like, you have a character who seems like they should be so interesting, and you don't do anything with them, so that's a little bit frustrating. And as I've written down, I don't think this movie lived up to a lot of people's expectations. So when I watched this movie, I decided not to judge it for what the expectations were, how it was going to be part of a bigger multiverse. I decided to judge it based on what it was. I think there's a lot of stuff that they did very well, and then there's some other stuff, like I said, with the third act, they needed to do better. So I feel like that's a big flaw. It didn't live up to a lot of people's expectations. And the last thing I've written down is it feels like it was maybe reworked in the editing room. I think that's probably the case. There's a lot of things in the trailer that didn't show up in the movie where it seemed like they were going to elaborate on the characters more. And when it comes to like Spider-Man multiverse Easter egg stuff, there's a few things that got left in the movie, like the post-credit scene, which we'll talk about in a little bit. That's a spoiler warning for that. And as well as him saying, "I'm Venom" to one of the guys he's terrorizing. That's it in the movie. I was like, okay, I appreciate that. I appreciate that he said that. And actually, like, it takes place in the same universe as Venom, so they don't get rid of all the stuff. However, Oscorp building that was shown in the trailer didn't come out in the movie, and this one scene where Morbius is running through a back alley and you see Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man spray painted on the wall doesn't come out. And I'm not sure if it's because Sony put those in there for Spider-Man No Way Home hype, or if they decided to just keep reworking it in the editing room because they didn't know what to do in between No Way Home and Let There Be Carnage and Multiverse of Madness and so much stuff. So I don't really know what went wrong with this stuff getting cut out, but I know stuff got cut out, so that is a bit weird. Okay, so now I'm going to go into my spoiler talk for the mid-credit scene. So if you have not seen the mid-credit scenes for Morbius, you've been warned. I'm going to talk about spoilers for the next few minutes. If you want to skip the chapter, skip the chapter. So I've already talked about things getting cut out, and I already talked about Venom. I forgot to give a spoiler warning for those, but they're not really spoilers, so it's okay. But the big spoiler for the mid-credit stuff is Vulture. So as you guys probably do remember, in the first mid-credit scene, we see the purple haze open up in the sky, which seems reminiscent of the thing from Spider-Man No Way Home. And all of a sudden, Vulture shows up in the prison, and he's baffled as to how he gets there, and he gets freed because no one knows how he's got there. And in the second mid-credit scene, we see Michael Morbius driving a car out to like the middle of the desert, and he meets Vulture with new wings, and he talks about how they want to team up to do some good, which is kind of interesting. And then Vulture says that he thinks Spider-Man has something to do with it. And so I actually kind of like these scenes because I feel like they tack on a bigger part of a multiverse. So the multiverse stuff was not completely gone from the movie. It's just there vaguely. And I know that people have like continuity issues with these scenes. I totally understand that, but I kind of thought through some scenes and stuff, and I think I kind of figured out what they were trying to go for with these two scenes. So I know the first big thing is people going, how did Vulture get into Morbius' universe? Because the spell in Spider-Man No Way Home was made to send the people who came from the other universes into the MCU home, not the other way around. But then I remembered the purple haze that opened up in the sky seemed very, very similar, or actually basically the same, as the purple haze that opened up in Spider-Man No Way Home, where they were starting to come through, and they couldn't stop them. So, what I'm wondering, this is a big theory, okay? So if it's possible for people in other universes to get up into that purple haze and into the MCU, I wonder if it's possible for someone in the MCU to get up in there and into a different universe. I mean, this is a big question, but it kind of does throw into a question, like, is that possible? And if it is possible, the thing becomes, do the people choose to go up into there? Judging by Vulture's reaction, probably not. But it could beg the question, could somebody be in charge of this thing who's putting them up in there? Is it Fate? Is it the Watcher? Is it, who is it? It's like, the question becomes, is it possible for the two to cross over? And if so, how do they get up there? That's a big question that becomes asked. And something else I considered, right, was that we talk about the spell, but the spell in No Way Home was also made to close the haze so that the people couldn't come through. So my thing is, what if Vulture, however it works, somehow got up into the purple haze and into Morbius's universe before Strange was able to close it? That's my theory. That's my theory. So I think what they were going for, and I think what they want to happen. I kind of just feel like they weren't very careful with how they executed it. So I feel like this is that thing where it technically makes sense, but you have to think deeper about it than what you're seeing in order to kind of get it. So if they decide to do continuity for Morbius, maybe we'll see more of that. I don't know, but that's just kind of how I interpreted the scene. I feel like that's what they were going for. Another important thing to mention is that recently Kevin Feige explained a lot of the stuff that happened in Spider-Man No Way Home with Peter basically being like Peter didn't exist whenever the spell happened. And so whenever Vulture in this movie says, this has something to do with Spider-Man, I think, and he can't remember, and Kevin Feige said that when people try to remember anything about Spider-Man, it's going to be like a hazy memory for them, and we're talking about the MCU Spider-Man. And because Vulture's an MCU character, I'm wondering if it still affects him even though he's not existing in the MCU anymore. And then the big question becomes, if this whole thing about it being like Tom Holland never existed, did it also affect people who knew him outside of the multiverse, or outside of the MCU? If that's the case, cool, but that's the thing where it's like, there's some cool, interesting potential with these scenes. There's just a lot of explaining that needs to happen. I know people also want to know how did Vulture get his wings in there? I think he built new wings. I mean, he's a criminal. He's the Walter White of the MCU. He knows people. He probably met some criminals in Morbius's crazy world and built new wings. I think that's what it is. Yeah, so those are some big questions that we have for the mid-credit scene. I think that there could be an easy way to explain it. I think that hopefully they do explain it in future stuff. And in regards to what they're going to do with Vulture and Morbius, I'm not gonna lie, this movie is not a great movie, but I do kind of want to see some continuity for Morbius, because I feel like there's a lot of interesting stuff set up in this movie that I just wanted to see more of. And if they decide to continue Morbius in like a sequel, or in like a Vulture and Morbius movie, or possibly in Venom 3, which I think could actually work, they could make it work. I feel like Morbius maybe just needs to be given second chance or whatever. Okay, so I'm done talking about the spoilery stuff. Before I go into my final rating and review, I want to say that to sum up Morbius, the way I feel about this movie, and I've said this before, and when I've said it to people, they're like, wow, you just described that movie really well, is that Morbius almost kind of feels like if they took a 2-parter TV pilot and turned it into a movie, but you're not going to see what's going to happen in the movie until the next episode comes out, if you know what I mean. So usually when you have a superhero TV show, the whole point of the pilot is to get you interested, to get you invested, and then you see what happens throughout the rest of the show. That's what this movie feels like. It feels like it does a good job at getting you invested in this character. You're intrigued by Michael Morbius. You want to see what they do with him, but they kind of don't do enough to make you want to see, or they don't do enough to continue the story, and you're not going to see this guy until some form of continuity comes out in the future. I don't know if there's going to be any continuity for Morbius. I kind of hope they do, regardless in any of the ways I just previously said in the spoiler part. But yeah, if they do, I hope that they just I hope they're able to give Morbius a second chance. I hope that they're able to, create a better, compelling story off of what they have. I feel like there's a lot of potential for this character. I'm invested. I'm on board with the character and the idea of Morbius. I just think that he needs to be given a second chance, kind of like how Andrew Garfield was given a second chance with Spider-Man No Way Home, and how I think Brie Larson's going to be given a second chance with Marvels. I just feel like a second chance needs to happen, if you know what I mean. So in the end, Morbius is not a great movie, but I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be. I still find it relatively entertaining, and I still think it's okay, and it's worth watching to a certain extent. I'm going to give Morbius an overall rating of a 7.5 out of 10. I think it's alright. I think it's entertaining and fun and watchable enough, minus some of the more frustrating elements about the story, and I'm going to give it an overall grade of a C. A C might kind of seem like a harsh grade to give it. It also might seem a little bit fair for some people. I think a C is appropriate because it's a thing where this movie had a lot of potential to be a B movie, but it kind of fell down because not everything was executed very well, so I think a C is a fair enough grade, but I think a 7.5 is also a decent enough rating because it is relatively entertaining. So that was my review for Morbius. This is my final episode in my new series. Next week I'm going to see Spider-Man Across Spider-Verse on opening night, and I will have a review for that next week. I'm also going to be doing an updated tier list video for every Marvel thing that I've covered. I'm going to be ranking all the Spider-Man movies that's outside of the MCU, among the MCU actually, so be on the lookout for that tier list video coming out pretty soon. I will also have a review coming out tomorrow for I Am Groot, so be on the lookout for that. If you guys want to support the channel, feel free to click on the playlist and watch all my other Spider-Man movie reviews, or you can watch all my other Marvel reviews. if you guys want to support the channel, just watch my other videos if you guys want to do that. Also, if you guys want to support the channel, please hit the like button and feel free to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get notified about these videos. And if you want to follow me on other platforms, go click the link in the description to go follow me on Twitch, Instagram, and TikTok, as I post a lot of content over there. Thank you guys so much as always for watching, and that's been it. Peace!